Hi, Ben.
Hi, Carl.
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am good too.
Good to see you, man.
It's good to see you too. I'm glad to be here. I know we initially started this podcast renewal kind of thing, trying to get a bunch of episodes in the bank so we could have a backlog for when you had your newest youngling added to your family. And life's been kind of crazy. We fell a little bit behind. Luckily, we had a couple buffer episodes ready to go, but I
Just
like
enough. Just enough.
just enough. But there's something that I like about today, how like we really got to get a good episode out of this. And I
Yeah,
like I like the pressure, and I think we have hit a flow together that I think we're gonna nail it.
I'm feeling good about it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
want to I want to set the expectations real high for the listener.
I was just listening to a podcast episode. It's like a bass podcast. It's like Scott's bass lessons, and he was saying how he just like can't get into Bruce what's his name from Cream, the bass player from Cream? Jack
Jack
Bruce, that's
Bruce,
right.
yeah.
Jack Bruce. And I'm like as a bass player, I'm embarrassed about this, but Scott was saying everyone is just so into it, and then they hype it up, and then I'm like, this is good, but like it's not like the best thing ever. So yeah, hopefully that is not what happens when people listen to this episode.
Yes, I hope that. So, wait, you're saying you hope that we're better than Cream?
I hope that we're better than Cream to Scott Devine, bass player, or better than Jack Bruce as a bass player to him, in his opinion of Jack
Yeah,
Bruce.
that is a that is a very odd
Yeah,
metric to measure
very odd.
ourselves against. Yeah,
Yes, that's the metric.
that's the
Like
metric. Is it
yeah,
imperial or metric?
it's I don't know.
He's British,
Imper-
right?
yeah, yeah, they're British. They might have been using like imperial back then. I don't know. I think everyone uses metric now except for America. But I think the Brits I think still use miles and like feet and stuff. But
I
I
know
but
Canadians do. There's like they're kind of like half and half. Anyway,
mm,
that yeah, that's we
this
could
is the
go
new
down
this is something that requires a Wikipedia search from me. So
which we're not going to do. We're just going to keep going. Um,
well, I
so
mean, Jack Bruce
oh
is a good segue for our topic. I think, yeah, in a weird way, in a weird sense,
yeah,
perhaps.
in a weird sense, because I forget what the topic is already, and we just talked about it like 3 minutes ago. So, tell me how Jack Bruce transitions into the topic.
Well, Jack Bruce played on stage, but then he also recorded in the studio, and I think we were going to talk about ways that because we're both coming from performance backgrounds. You're a drummer, I'm a bass player, so we've made a transition from the stage to the studio, and maybe we thought about maybe talking about how that's informed our studio life, like how the stage has informed our work in the studio. So yeah, that's is that a cool topic?
I think so.
Like how hyped should the audience be right
I
now?
don't know. I don't know. We're already going down in flames.
Yeah.
No, I think this is really important because I know we are not the only ones that have started on one side of the glass and ended up on the other side, right? So there are there's a pretty big core belief that I have about music, and it's that a lot of what we experience in our own little weird corner of the industry, a lot of what we learn and what we've experienced can be applied to other parts of the industry as well, and to other roles in the industry, other aspects of it. I realized that pretty early on because I started playing piano when I was really young, and then when I was in I think third grade or fourth grade, I started playing clarinet, and I didn't have to relearn how to read treble clef because I already learned that. I already knew what a quarter note was. I already knew what a quarter rest was. Like I wasn't like virtuosic in third grade, but I at least had a foundational knowledge from another instrument that I was still able to apply to the new instrument. And that continued when I went on to learning other instruments, and then even going from harmonic and melodic instruments into playing drums, there's still so much that I could take with me when I go from one to the other. And a lot of like the technical application is really where the differences are, but a lot of the core foundational, uh, you know, conceptual stuff that applies everywhere. And I'd like to talk today about like what are the core conceptual foundational things about being a live like like a gigging musician, like a session, a live touring musician. What are the things that we can take from those experiences that we've also applied on the other side of the glass in the studio? So, do you have any, Ben, that
Yeah.
I know you do. I guess the question is more like what's the first one that jumps out to you?
Okay, the first one that definitely jumps out to me is checking my ego and serving the song. Because as a bass player, you're there as like a supportive role, and you're just trying to elevate the song as much as you can with your bass playing. And there's a time and place to to do fancy things and to do tricks on stage, but usually you're holding it down, right? At least for me as a bass player. And so I've learned, you know, through you know just years of playing on stage, that the better you could just hold it down and support the song, the more happy everyone's going to be with you. If you're like slapping and doing all kinds of fills the entire thing, it gets annoying, right? People get annoyed, and when I learned to just kind of sort of hold it down all the time, and for the most part, maybe every once in a while you do a lick just to have fun, but for the most part, you're just kind of holding it down. People are just always so much happier with you as a bass player, and keeping that ego in check and just serving the song is really what it's all about. And the same thing applies, in the studio of when you're working with an artist and just trying to get their song, you know, to be their vision, to serve them, to choose parts that serve the song and aren't just to like do something cool because you can. And same in mixing, just because you can do a crazy vocal throw doesn't mean it's always appropriate. um, yeah. So just kind of serving the song and making sure that everything suits what the artist's vision is sort of keeping that ego in check and keeping your eye on the prize, which is helping the artist make a song that they're proud of and fits their vision. So yeah, that would be my first takeaway. How about you, Carl?
Okay. I'm going to acknowledge that we are going to be opposites today because normally you are the person with the very practical examples, and I'm the one that's like super existential and unnecessarily heady. But I'm going to say something very, very practical. And I'm going to say uh, it's the importance of tempo and how even small shifts in tempo can make or break the energy and the emotion of a song. And obviously, I'm a drummer. I can't, that was my background. So I'm going to be more, highly attuned to tempo shifts and variations and things more than most people. And weirdly enough, I think I didn't really get a deeper understanding of how important tempo really, really is until I had more experience in the studio as a session drummer and playing on tracks with a click and then starting to use a click live. That was when I started to become much more conscious of when things shift, much more conscious of how my like emotional state affects how fast I play even. Um, like knowing that if I'm really like anxious and amped up, I'm gonna play faster than I normally would because the adrenaline's going and it doesn't feel faster to me in the moment, but listening back, it definitely is. And when I would play a song with a click track that is like 124 every time, there will be some nights that I'd play that same song and it feels like it's going so slow, and other nights where I feel like it's going so fast. And it's not changing speed; it's just my perception of it.
Yeah.
And so I know this isn't something that I necessarily learned from live and then applied it to the studio. It was something that I learned in the studio, applied it live, which then really deepened my understanding of it. And that's what I was able to apply back in the studio and understand it in the studio a lot more and being way more conscious of how things fit into a groove like tempo wise and timing wise, but also how important it is to experiment with tempos because with sometimes just one BPM change can completely elevate or destroy the vibe of a song.
Yeah. Oh, we talked about this I think in the theory episode of just like experimenting with that stuff and going up, going down a little bit, like just until it feels totally right. And you know what? I guess you could come back the next day in a different mood and feel differently, but yeah, those like slight little changes make such a big difference. I'm so with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you talked about, the minimalist simplicity kind of approach and
I
how
would
that
say check the ego and serve the song more than simplicity
okay.
necessarily.
Okay,
It,
okay.
it could be
So
that slapping the bass is the right approach, right? But it
true.
not because you feel like slapping.
So we talked about, the checking your ego at the door. We talked about the effect that tempo has on the energy of the song and the way that the emotion is uh, accurately or effectively or ineffectively communicated to the audience. But what about the interpersonal aspects of being on, not just being on stage with a band or with a group of musicians, but just being inside of part of a team? Like
Yeah.
how has your team member skills
Yeah.
affected how you are in the studio?
Oh, dude, so much. So much. Again, also checking the ego thing that applies there as well. But yeah, I think being a people person, know how to work in a group setting and get along with people, even if you disagree, and figuring out how to sort out disagreements, um, whether it's musical or business or whatever it might be.
Or
When you're
personal? Yeah.
yeah personal. Man, I've learned so many lessons and I think everyone makes mistakes also with especially when you're working with friends in a band. Like you make mistakes and apologize and or they apologize to you and move on and bury hatchets and stuff and there's the greater good of like moving past these issues and yeah, I mean they're definitely working in a band we had fights and stuff or different members would be upset with other members and not necessarily you and talking and trying to work it out. um, yeah, that's huge. And I think again maybe it goes back to my first thing of like dropping the ego thing is like how do you serve this project as a band, you know, and serve it best and as long as it's right for you, you have to serve the you have to look at the big picture of what's going to be best for this group playing live and not necessarily what's just great for you. And if it's not great for you, then maybe it's not the right band. Same way as if this music is not right for you, maybe you shouldn't be working on it as in the role of a
Yeah.
mixer or producer. Um, yeah, I don't know if like how much deeper I should go into this, but
What
yeah,
about
like
like the
yeah,
the conflict like conflict management, or
yeah,
conflict resolution?
yeah. I think I think when you're in a band, you learn how to say things in a way that another person won't be offended, but will still hopefully push the needle that you're trying to push. You know, like if you think this is not the right kind of music for the band to be playing, I don't know. Like, there's a way to say something that won't hurt somebody's feelings, but will still come across at you can come across as kind and still get your agenda across, or and because people's egos, especially when they're young in a band, are probably a lot more fragile, and so you kind of I've learned how to not hurt people's feelings or not to, or why how maybe my feelings would not have been hurt if it had been done in a different way. And when you're working with an artist in the studio, like you have no business offending them, right? Because they're hiring you and you're there to support them in this very sensitive time in their life. And so you can have an agenda to make help them sound better if you think what you're doing is right, and hopefully it is because they've hired you. But you have to give that stuff across in a way that's so kind and and knowing that they and that they know that you have their back, and that
Yeah.
you're not abandoning them. You're just giving them a little bit of criticism, or you're just giving them something constructive to think about. So does that make sense? Is that something that you've had to
Yeah.
do in the context of a band?
Yeah. Oh, all the time. And to clarify, you're talking about, like when you say agenda, you don't mean like anything's like a sinister, ulterior motive. You just mean like you mean it in like the literal sense, not in the negative connotation sense. It's just like,
Yeah,
oh no, like you have a goal you're trying to achieve, whether it's a specific thing you're trying to achieve that day or just like the goal of the vision of the song itself.
yeah. Like in the
Not
context of
like
a
yeah,
wedding band, it would be like we should be playing more like pop songs to attract, higher quality weddings instead of playing like this old '60s song or something.
yeah,
Just for example. And in the
yeah,
studio, it could be like, I don't know, I want this person to sing in a different, kind of way, like maybe brighter or breathier or something. And I don't want them to be
yeah.
offended that I didn't like the way they sounded when
No,
they were
that makes
singing on the
sense.
mic. But I'm
Yeah,
just throwing out a couple examples that are just coming top of my mind. But
yeah.
it could be numerous other kinds of things.
Yeah, what's coming to mind for me was that I really loved figuring out set lists. Like I was really into determining like what the order of the songs would be, like how to kind of shape the energy and the flow of the set. And that ended up becoming something that a lot of the bands I was in, whether I was like in the band or it was like a hired gun, like mercenary kind of situation, people would get me to come up with the set lists. And sometimes I had to communicate the reasoning behind my choices to members of the band or to other people in the project. And that actually kind of reminds me of one embarrassing story that is it's a bit of a tangent, but I just remember like I still feel terrible about it. I still feel terrible about it, but not terrible. I feel embarrassed, I guess, is maybe a better way to say it. But I was playing a gig with a singer songwriter, and I think we had like a 4 or 5 piece band for that show. And I was usually the one in that project in charge of calling out the set list. And for whatever reason that day, we were playing in like an art gallery or something, and we didn't have a set list like figured out beforehand. And the lead singer was like, "Carl, just call out songs." So going through it, I'm just like going through, and I'm kind of acting like a DJ in a sense where I'm trying to get the vibe of the room, trying to get the vibe of the musicians, trying to like see what I think is going to be the next, the right next song to play. And we're maybe like I don't know 40 minutes into the set, and I call out a song, and I start counting it in. And we start playing it, and about 3 measures in, the lead singer starts laughing and stops, and we all kind of stop, and he's like, "Did we play that before?" I realized that like 2 songs ago, I already called it like we just played that song like eight
It was just your
minutes
favorite
prior.
song. It was like your
It
favorite
was just my
song.
favorite song, and I felt it could have been great for that moment. However, it was also great for a moment that happened 2 songs ago.
It just
Um,
your
so
memory failed you.
my memory failed me, and yeah, I don't know if anybody else will ever remember that, but I won't let myself live it down. But that was one of those things that I had to learn how to communicate that and had to try to communicate to them why I felt the way that I did about a certain order of songs because you have different people in a project have their own different reasonings for what the order should be. Maybe they want to play their favorite song first, or they want to play their favorite song last, or they want to. Ooh, here's an example. Maybe one person wants to play song A and B back to back because of the fact that they have all the same guitar pedal settings, coincidentally, for those 2 songs. The keyboard player has to like switch from organ to playing guitar for that and needs time to switch over and then has to switch back to organ again in the next song after it. So it's like trying to figure out, okay, well, I understand why this is a convenient choice and makes sense for person A, but it makes it super inconvenient for person B. How do we kind of find a happy medium of like, okay, this makes the most sense for the song. This makes or for the songs, this makes the most sense for the set. And yeah, this would be more convenient for you if we did these 2 songs back to back, but here are the reasons why we should split them up because of X, Y, and Z. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like in the context of the studio, it's just about explaining why you're going about doing different things in a way that people won't be offended and they'll understand what the intent is.
Yeah, like why I know we talked about like how to sound like a high school band a couple weeks
Right.
ago,
Those
but
yeah.
it's that classic thing of like, the drummer plays a fill going into the chorus and the guitarist plays a little lick going into the chorus and the bass player plays a little lick going into the chorus and the vocalist is doing a pickup into the chorus. And as a producer, you have to kind of explain to them and say, hey, no, don't do all of those things at once. If you do all of those, then nothing gets to have a moment. And it's just kind of discombobulating for the listener. So having
Yeah.
to have that kind of a conversation, it's like, okay, I know you like that riff that you play there. I know you like that drum fill, but vocals are top priority in this. Or like if for whatever reason it's like I don't know, like a weird guitar virtuoso's solo project, and they're the focus, and the singer is just an afterthought. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't work on that project, but I'm sure those projects existed back in like the
They
80s and
definitely
90s.
exist. I
Yeah,
don't work on I haven't worked on
yeah.
anything like that yet.
But like, so yeah, so there are going to be exceptions like that. But generally speaking, at least for the stuff that I work on, like vocals are, and
Yeah.
everything else needs to get out of the way. And trying to be able to explain that to a band when maybe the guitarist is the one that wrote the song. I'm trying to say, okay, I know you wrote the song, but your guitar lick here, like we got to save that for a different moment because that's getting in the way. And trying to have those kind of conversations where it's like it's not just a logistical issue of, oh, these songs should be played back to back on stage because of XYZ, technical or instrumental reason. It's like, hey, your creative idea is great in a vacuum, but in the context of everything else, it kind of doesn't help the song. It kind of gets in the way. And trying to have those conversations in a way that is very delicate and can really change the emotional vibe in the room and of the whole, not just in that moment, but for the whole project. Like it's not fun if you don't handle those conversations delicately. So
Yeah.
that's, being a session player for so long, being a hired gun for so long, and also kind of being
Mm.
in a lot of the projects I was in, I was kind of like band dad. I was kind of like the one that people looked to for this kind of direction.
Right.
That was really great practice for when I made the transition into the studio because I had a lot of difficult conversations, like a lot, and I have a lot of practice being able to explain with grace
With grace.
why
Love
why
it.
somebody's idea
Yeah.
is not for the greater good when they
Yeah.
genuinely believe that it is.
Yeah. Man, that is so real. There and I feel like so much of what we do is trying to explain things with a lot of grace and give people our years of wisdom that we have under our belt from also the studio and also the stage, um, and be like, this is we've been around this we've been around the bend a few times. Let me help you out here because we just know because we've done it more. Um, yeah, and then it's all about the delivery, right?
Yeah.
Um, so another thing that I was thinking about that happens in a band or on stage is just like live arrangements. And I mean, this is what you were talking about, maybe giving over as advice, but just learning what arrangement works on stage is really informative also in the studio when it comes to producing, especially, and also mixing, maybe muting some of those fills that are, are not needed. Um, and just, yeah, just knowing what serves the song and like how arrangements are built and transitions and all that stuff is such a, I carry all of that with me into the studio of just knowing how how groove will fit together, how to build momentum, you know just even being a live bass player and knowing how to build momentum with the bass informs how I'm building momentum in a song, so all that stuff, that arrangement thing is such a big part of what I still do today in the studio. Is that something that's a big one for you as well?
Yeah, and I think an example that I'm thinking of is when this is actually maybe using your studio experience to inform the live arrangement, or at least you having your studio experience help you to be aware of what works live versus what won't work in the studio. And I think maybe a good example would be long intros, long outros, vamping bridge sections. Like when you're on stage, it is a multi-sensory experience for the audience, right? There's the sound, there's the visuals, there's the smell of booze
Right.
and bo, whatever it is.
There's that
Um,
human experience of
it's a
like
human
being
experience.
live in the room.
Yes, I call it booze and bo. You call it the human experience. I think you were a little bit more eloquent than I was, but it's like a multi-sensory experience, and long intros can be used to build anticipation. It can be used as a way for someone to talk, to do introductions over it, to tell the story over it. There are all these things that you can do, but when you get in the studio, you have to have the ability to tell the band, I know this works live. This is not live. There are the things that enable this to work live, the things that enable this intro to be a minute and a half long live, that context that is being created on stage when you're performing it, the visuals of the singer going back and forth, the emphatic movements of the drummer, all of those things, they can't see that when they're listening to your song on Spotify. So it's like how do we recognize the things that are adding to the live performance that would actually take away from the studio performance?
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. And not
And
all they
and
right. Not all artists need to play the studio version, right? There
yeah,
are
and
there are
and
those that do, but then there's those that don't. I'm thinking about jam bands and all kinds of funk bands and stuff like that, where
yeah, yeah,
the live experience is meant to be a different sort of experience.
yeah. And
You
I
know,
think
like
going,
yeah.
oh sorry,
No, no, no. I was just gonna say like the record is supposed to be like this is the archetypical version of the song or whatever. And then the live experience is like, how are we feeling tonight? You know? Maybe we can play it a little bit faster, right? Like you were talking about like tempo and stuff and
yeah,
mood and like or maybe we can add an extra like maybe we can build up with this intro or maybe we could just like jam out because we're having fun, you know? So
yeah.
it's
That's something that
legit.
I have to remind. Yeah, I have to remind artists that a lot of times where I'll tell them like, because you do it this way live doesn't mean you should do it this way in the studio. But the same goes both ways. Just because you do it this way in the studio doesn't mean that you have to do it that way live. Like save that cool idea for the live show. Save
Yeah.
that cool idea for the acoustic version. Like that's there. You can make it a special experience for people that know the song comes to you live, and it is a little bit different. You
Yeah.
get that's and I think maybe a practical example of like kind of walking that fine line between having the goal or like the agenda in the non-negative way, and of trying not to upset somebody about their creative idea that they have. A practical example is how I will always try to frame those arrangement changes. Those usually it's like kind of trimming the fat from a live version of or the song that they've been like practicing and like performing it that way. I will try to say like, hey, like save this for the live show. Like it's okay for them to be different because a lot of times people just they think in a very black and white way that if we change it for the studio, therefore it has to change live. And I think you know, jazz artists know that, jam bands know that, like any kind of like improvisational uh, musicians, like they know that that's just part of what they do. That's expected in what they do. But when you get more into the rock and especially in pop, that's not something that they have a lot of experience with generally. But I do like I cut my teeth doing a lot of like avant-garde jazz. So like a lot of improv. So that's one of those things that my in a way all of the improv experience that I have helps my conversations with pop artists. I never
Hmm.
really thought would be a thing. Like my experience doing those things live makes me aware of what can work live versus in the studio, what can not work versus in the studio, and it enables me to use that experience but also my experience in the pop realm, and translate not just the goals, but also the remedies and the other uses for those ideas.
Very cool. I like that a lot. Is there anything else that you want to share that maybe you've learned, or I think I maybe have like one more that I could that's coming to mind.
Well, I was gonna say, why don't if you have one more, tell us that one more, and then I'm gonna tee up the next episode
Oh, I love
because
it.
I have an idea already. We're gonna
Oh,
do
I
another
love
short
that.
one.
I love that. Um, uh, so the last thing I would just say about like being a live musician was learning how to learn songs and learn them quickly and effectively and efficiently and remembering, changes and chord progressions and parts. And I just think that cutting my teeth doing so many shows and learning so many songs and playing them night after night, you just learn you just learn how to learn music. And so when an artist walks in with a song, I'm just ready to go. Like, okay, cool. Yeah, and I'll remember the chord progression and I'll think about ways we can change the chord progression really quickly. And I'll remember my part when I'm recording it, right? I'll remember what I wanted to do in each section with the bass. And like I don't have to do too many passes. And I'm able to record very efficiently because I've learned how to learn the music because I've done this so long for so many years. I've learned how to learn music and I've put in those hours listening to the records, going over all the parts, memorizing it. And so just all those years and reps of doing the learning of music enables me to learn music really quickly and to execute it very efficiently. And yeah, so I think that's like maybe even the biggest thing that I've learned from playing live is just learn how to play music. And yeah, and there's nothing like learning how to play for a gig, or like if you get a new gig and then all of a sudden you have to learn a bunch of songs and then you like go to the shed and you just work, like that just gives you so much material, and like that just it's just so much to learn from, and that will give you tools in the studio like nothing else, I think.
I want to respond to that before I tee up the next episode because that actually makes me think of something too. You're talking about the ridiculous quantity of songs that we've learned over the years, and I think one of the things that made me appreciate is that many songs can have the same chord progression. Many songs can have the same basic drum groove, but yet we become aware of all of the nuances that make each song different. So when we go into the studio and we're working on a song that happens to be 6/4/5/1, whatever, we know like we don't shut down and think, "Oh, I've heard that progression before. I can't do anything with that." We realize, "Oh no, there are infinite things that we can do even with a simple chord progression, even with a simple, Billie Jean drum beat." And it makes us explore the different options of how we can add nuance and slight variations to these things to be able to make it unique.
Yeah, I love that. And I would say I would go even further now of just like learning all these songs and knowing all these songs because you've learned how to play them just builds up that discography in your head, which is something that you're always going to as a producer and mixer of like,
Yeah.
we talked about reference mixes, but there's just all this musical references available at an arm's length inside the library of our brains. Um,
When
and
you keep your brain an arm's length away from you.
yep.
That explains so much, Ben.
Yeah, it's amazing. Um, Thank you, audience, for bearing with me on this roller coaster ride of understanding how my brain works.
And also its location.
And it's really meta because it's in my brain, but it's also an arm's length away. Amazing.
It's a
Yeah,
big brain.
it's a yeah.
It's all
Listen,
Benny Big Brains over here.
it's the Neanderthal brain. Um, yeah, good stuff.
Okay,
Awesome.
so
So take us
yeah,
home. Take us home and to the
okay,
next episode.
I'm gonna take you home. I would like to actually make the next week's episode, that we are going to record in approximately 2 minutes, but you are going to hear in approximately 7 days. Uh, I want to talk about specifically how our background instruments affect the way that we produce. Like me being a
Mm,
drummer and how that affects the way that I produce. You
yeah,
being a bassist, how that affects the way that you produce, and maybe how we approach the problem solving and decision making from different perspectives.
great. Let's do it. Well,
Okay,
for the
so we will.
audience, I guess. We'll see you later.
Yeah.
But for Carl,
Well,
we'll hang out.
yeah. Yeah, we'll keep on going. I guess on that note, listeners, you're wonderful. We love you. We'll see you next week. And Ben, even though I'm going to see you in approximately 3 seconds. Bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl.